The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Leng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the rogue cards in the Wages of Sin, the second Mythos pack in the Circle Undone cycle. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. This pack has been a great one so far. Let's see how the rogues fare. The first rogue card in the pack is Henry Wan, Aspiring Actor. Henry is a 3-cost asset with an agility skill icon and the ally and criminal trait. He has the following game text action: exhaust Henry Wan one at a time, reveal random tokens from the chaos bag until you choose to stop, or until you reveal a skull, cultist, tablet, elder thing, or tentacle symbol. If you choose to stop, for each token revealed via this effect, you may either draw one card or gain one resource. If you revealed a skull, cultist, tablet, elder thing, or tentacle symbol, do nothing. Henry has 1 health, 2 sanity, and he takes up an ally slot. Henry 1 was spoiled in FFG's preview article for the Wages of Sin. I didn't much care for Henry 1 then, and I don't care for him now. I am going to come right out and say it. Henry 1 is a bad card for most investigators. First, he costs an action and 3 resources to play. 3 resources is a significant chunk of change, and as we'll see in a moment, there is no guarantee Henry can recoup his cost, much less profit. Second, triggering Henry's ability is a gamble. You wager an action for a chance to draw a fistful of cards or generate a pile of resources. I've never been much of a gambler because the odds are always stacked in the house's favor, and that is definitely true of Henry. You might gain a couple of cards and or resources with Henry, but if you get in the habit of pushing your luck, odds are you will end up with nothing. So what are the odds of gaining cards and or resources if you use Henry during a scenario such as the Untamed Wilds? Well, if you take an action to draw a card or gain a resource, you have a 100% chance of success. If you trigger Henry, your odds of success are only 71.43%. Basically, you are sacrificing some of that certainty for a chance to push your luck to draw cards, gain resources, or a combination of the two. The important thing to remember about Henry is that you've got to pull from the chaos bag at least twice. Otherwise, you're better off using that action to go for the sure thing and just take a card or a resource. The problem with Henry is that your odds of success deteriorate rapidly after that first pull. If I've done my math right, you've got a 49.45% chance of gaining 2 cards and or resources and a 33% chance of gaining 3. You've got a 21% chance of gaining 4 and a 12.6% chance of gaining 5. As you can see, the odds of successfully pushing your luck are less than 50% on the second pull, and they drop off dramatically from there. And then there are times you are going to pull a special token on your first pull, and you will get nothing. If you're really worried about drawing a bad token from the Chaos Bag, you could play Henry 1 in some sort of Chaos Bag manipulation. Wendy Adams comes to mind, however, I'm not convinced that Wendy makes Henry that much better. If you trigger Wendy's ability, you're discarding a card from your hand to reveal another token at the same odds. Say you reveal a Skull token as your second token. You trigger Wendy's response to return the skull to the bag and reveal the next token. You haven't changed the odds since you still have less than 50% chance of successfully revealing 2 good tokens. If you draw one of the special tokens again, you're out a card and an action, which is a very bad deal. I've seen a few people on the forum suggesting combining Henry with cards that seal tokens to bend the odds in your favor. That's certainly a possibility, although it's important to remember that it will take time and, more importantly, resources to set up that sort of combination. If you get it working, and that's a big if, since the combination is still a gamble unless you're able to seal a lot of tokens at the same time, I have my doubts that you will ever recoup the resources you spend to set up that combination. If you're not going to recoup the resources, much less profit, you've really got to ask yourself, what's the point? I mean, all that time and resources would have been much better spent simply beating the scenario. Now, if resources don't matter to you and all you want is the card draw, then it may be worthwhile pursuing this strategy, since the rogue class doesn't really have a card that lets you draw on demand. However, I realize I'm starting to sound like a broken record here. That is a gamble. It's worth noting that Safina Russo is the only rogue investigator who can play the Seal tech in combination with Henry Wan in solo. If you're interested in giving this strategy a try, you could use this deck posted by Motux over at Arkham DB. It's a multiplayer deck that attempts to seal the Skull tokens to create a mutual advantage between Safina and another investigator, likely a survivor armed with a baseball bat or old hunting rifle. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not a mathematician and my calculations could be wrong. Fortunately, I do know a mathematician who has done an in-depth analysis of Henry Wan. Curtis Miller, a friend of the channel and mathematics instructor at the University of Utah, put Henry through his paces for his article, Making a Profit with Henry Wan in Arkham Horror, the card game. I will leave a link to the article down below if you're interested in reading it for yourself. Miller argues that in most situations, Henry Wan is worse than Leo DeLuca and worse than gaining cards and or resources with a regular action. Now, Miller does concede a more favorable Chaos bag, cards that seal tokens, or cards such as Olive McBride may make Henry slightly better, but playing Henry with seals and or Olive McBride requires a hell of a lot of work and some luck of the draw. Ultimately, Miller concludes that if you're looking to have fun gambling, Henry is your card, but if you're looking to win, you're better off looking elsewhere. If I haven't made it clear, I am not a fan of Henry Wan, and I highly doubt that I will ever play him in most rogue or off-class rogue builds. I would just much rather stick with Leo DeLuca in my deck and gain an extra action every turn, which I could use to draw an extra card or gain a resource if necessary, rather than mess around with Henry. If I've done the math right, if you reveal 2 tokens, you've got a 50-50 chance of gaining 2 cards and or resources, or gaining nothing, and your odds drop off dramatically from there. Sure, you might get lucky and gain a pile of cards and or resources, but the odds of that happening with any consistency are so small that it's not worth talking about. Henry is strictly a card for the gamblers out there, but if you are one of those gamblers who does get lucky with Henry, do drop me a line because I would love to hear about it. The second rogue card in the pack is Swift Reflexes. It's a 2-cost rogue event with 2 agility skill icons and the Gambit trait. It's fast, and you may play it during any investigator's turn except during an action. It has the game text, immediately take an action as if it were your turn. This action does not count toward the number of actions you can take each turn. I really like this card. The ability to take an extra action in Arkham Horror LCG can be a game changer, and Swift Reflexes is one of those rare level 0 cards that lets you take an extra action on demand without jumping through a bunch of hoops first. Swift Reflexes is also notable because it lets you interrupt another investigator's turn to take an extra action, a very rare ability that we've seen on only one other card. Swift Reflexes also happens to be a non-exceptional event, which means Safina Russo may duplicate it with the Painted World, and Wendy Adams may play it from her discard pile with Wendy's Amulet. The only thing better than one extra action is multiple extra actions. To top it all off, Swift Reflexes has 2 agility skill icons, which makes it a viable alternative to manual dexterity. Before I go any further, I'd like to take a quick look at some of the other cards that grant additional actions, because rogues have received quite a few of them over the years. The core set featured 2 cards, Skids O'Toole and Leo DeLuca. Skids' ability lets him spend 2 resources to take an additional action once per turn. However, you obviously can't take advantage of this ability unless you're playing Skids. Leo DeLuca is an amazing ally that lets you take an additional action every turn. However, he's also an ally that costs 6 resources, so he may not be the best choice depending on your build. If you're playing multiplayer, there may be a lot of competition for Leo's services. Quick Thinking, a skill from Undimensioned and Unseen, lets you immediately take an action as if it were your turn if the skill test succeeds. The nice thing about Quick Thinking is that you may commit it to another investigator's skill test. Unfortunately, Quick Thinking doesn't grant you an extra action on demand, since a skill test needs to happen first. The other problem is the investigator needs to pass that skill test by 2 or more, which is never a sure thing as far as the Chaos bag is concerned. Ace in the Hole from Where Doom Awaits and Borrowed Time from Shattered Aeons can give you a lot of extra actions to play with on your turn. Unfortunately, both are exceptional cards that cost 6 experience apiece, so you won't be packing either of those at the start of a campaign. Speaking of experience points, you may spend 2 of them to pick up the 41 Derringer from the Pallid Mask Mythos pack. It will grant you an additional action. However, once again, that action comes with strings attached. First, you need to attack with the 41 Derringer, and second, that attack needs to succeed by 3 or more. Again, that doesn't really fit the definition of action on demand. There are a couple of out-of-class options to generate extra actions, such as the Ace of Rods and Police Badge, both of which cost experience points, so it's extremely unlikely, unless of course you're playing the Circle Undone campaign that is, that you'll have either of these cards in your deck at the start of a campaign. Swift Reflexes is nearly identical to Skids O'Toole's special ability. It costs the same amount of resources and it's fast, so you don't spend an action to gain an action. Swift Reflexes is slightly different in that you play it during any player window during an investigator's turn to immediately take an action as if it were your turn. Basically, you get to interrupt their turn to take an action before that investigator's turn resumes. I can think of many situations in solo or multiplayer where Swift Reflexes would be extremely helpful. Think about all those times you needed just one more investigate, fight, evade, or move action to seal the victory. As we've seen, unless you happen to be playing Skids, Swift Action is really the only viable choice if you need to generate an action on demand. I'd be willing to argue that Swift Reflexes is slightly better than Skid's ability in multiplayer because it does let you interrupt another investigator's turn to take that action. Players love to coordinate their actions in multiplayer, hatching devious plans to thwart the advance of the agenda deck. Unfortunately, one bad pull from the Chaos Bag can disrupt even the best laid plans. Swift Reflexes gives the investigators a chance to salvage them. Let's assume an investigator is engaged with an enemy. That investigator needs to kill that enemy this turn so he or she can move to a neighboring location and resign. Unfortunately, the investigator pulls a tentacle on the fight action. Suddenly, that investigator is in deep trouble. However, if the rogue or off-class rogue is packing Swift Reflexes, there is still a chance that the plan can come to fruition. The rogue can interrupt that investigator's turn to engage the enemy or kill it outright, freeing up that investigator to move. Or perhaps the investigator needs to discover the final clue at a location in order to advance the act deck. If the investigator tasked with discovering those clues comes up a clue short due to some crazy RNG from the Chaos Bag, the rogue can step in and lend a hand with Swift Reflexes. Things can and will go wrong in the Arkham Horror LCG, and Swift Reflexes provides that added bit of insurance against setbacks. Swift Reflexes isn't a complicated or flashy card, but I think it's a strong contender for rogue builds, especially if you can abuse it like Safina or Wendy. The ability to pull an extra action out of your hat can win you games in the Arkham Horror LCG. However, up to this point, the ability to generate an extra action on demand has been strictly limited to Skids O'Toole. Swift Reflexes changes that. Now, any rogue or off-class rogue with 2 resources to his or her name can take an action, regardless of which investigator happens to be taking a turn. The only downside to the card is that it requires patience. You've got to be willing to sit on Swift Reflexes until just the right moment because the value of that extra action depends a lot on the situation. Recognizing the right moment to play this card can be tricky, and the right moment may never come, in which case the card is sitting in your hand doing nothing. That's not great. That said, it's safe to say that setbacks are all but a certainty in this game. Any card that lets an investigator or group of investigators potentially recover from one is worth a long, hard look in my books. That's going to do it for my look at the rogue cards in the Wages of Sin. This pack is a mixed bag for rogues. Henry 1 feels like a trap for the vast majority of investigators. His ability looks fun, but the math suggests he simply doesn't pay off in the long run. You might be able to get Henry working for you if you play him in combination with cards that seal tokens or Olive McBride, but there is only one investigator who can pull that off at the moment, and that sort of elaborate combination lends itself to multiplayer rather than solo. Swift Reflexes, on the other hand, is the type of card I like because it can make a huge impact when you play it. There are many, many games where I find myself saying, if only I had one more action. As long as you've got 2 resources to your name, Swift Reflexes gives you that action. What you do with it is, well, that's up to you. That's going to do it for this review. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.